Ask the first question. This is Unit 1. The question is, how would you distinguish between a government with a constitution and a constitutional government? Why is that distinction important? And then the two sub-questions. Why is a constitution considered a higher law? What are the major characteristics of a higher law? And the second sub-question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a written constitution? And we have a timer. You may begin.
A government with a constitution should provide a set of guidelines for people and government to follow that empowers authority and consent to the ones who have sovereignty. A constitution, according to Oxford Dictionary, is a set of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organization is governed. A conclusion can be drawn that the constitutional government is a government with a constitution, as it sets of fundamental principles. However, Woodrow Wilson clarifies that a constitutional government is more than a government operating under a specific context. He establishes that a constitutional government is those whose powers been adapted to the interests of the people and maintained of individual liberty. This creates more than just a set of principles that would protect fundamental rights. Therefore, a constitutional government would create limits for government in order to protect the fundamental principles of its people. Totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Soviet Union had a constitution, but they did little to protect individuals.
According to the natural right philosophers, argued that all people are born with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and property. If people were to live in a state of nature, these rights could be jeopardized. Therefore, government must be created. Philosophers like Thomas Hobbes argued that a man cannot distinguish between good and evil, and added that society could turn into a war of every man against every man. His solution was to create a government with a set of guidelines that would protect individual rights at all costs, even fear. This varied from John Locke's philosophy, who believed that a government needed the consent of the people. This set a foundation to the difference between a constitutional government and an unconstitutional government. A constitution could be in place, but it may not set the limitations a government is. England, for example, does not have a constitution, but does have multiple documents that give order and limits a government to protect their rights. A constitutional government is a form in which written, unwritten, or partially written, in those in power must obey.
In a constitutional government, a constitution becomes the supreme law of the land. Article 6, Section 2 of the United States Constitution states that the Constitution and laws of the United States are the supreme law of the land. In Federal Paper 33, Alexander Hamilton states that the supreme law of the land has the power and ability to make laws, and all should follow, even those in power. This principle comes from the historical documents like the Magna Carta, where noblemen persuade to sign a document stating that even the king himself should follow the laws. In Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court dictated who should be the next president despite the will of the people. The usage of the Electoral College was criticized over the usage of the popular vote. Having an official constitution allows government to have a set of guidelines that will be followed at all times by all three branches. A constitution sets and establishes a document that can be flexible, but above all gives the rule of the law.
In countries like the United States, the written constitution is adaptable to the needs of the nation and contains flexible meaning. The amending of the Constitution, as established in Amendment 5, makes the process of changing the Constitution difficult. Nevertheless, a written Constitution creates a concrete document that can be used to address any issue, unlike a written Constitution which relies on traditions and set of standards that may not be familiar with. The United States has a set of traditions and laws that have been modified our society, like the President's Cabinet. Thank you. We are now ready for follow-up questions.
Thank you. Who would like to ask the first question?
I'll ask the first. You've explained what the advantages and disadvantages of a written constitution are, and I'd like you to explain now what the advantages and disadvantages of an unwritten constitution would be.
The advantages of an unwritten constitution is like keeping tradition, like in England, British. They like don't have a constitution, but they have like all these documents that come together to like set all the rules basically.
And why is that good?
It keeps tradition like old ways.
I believe it's good because it's set up as a function where everybody has it's protected by the natural rights. Nobody's abusing each other's power. I don't know, I feel like it just comes together as a good function. They work together well.
Another example of why it would be good is because it would be easier in a way to pass other laws. Like in the United States, it was very hard to get women's suffrage, but in a country where it may not have a written constitution, it would be a lot easier in a way to pass an amendment like that.
Thank you.
How would you distinguish between direct and representative democracy?
Direct is when everybody votes and everybody has a say. Or representative is when, like in the United States, we elect our representatives and we elect our Senate. They are supposed to say they are supposed to represent what the common people want, instead of having so many people, like in the United States, vote for what they want.
Just as a follow-up to that, if you don't have what if you don't like your representative government, Maria?
If you don't like your representative government, you can vote the next time to not elect them as your representative. And that's why the terms sometimes are like 6 and 2 years, because if you don't necessarily like them, the next time you really don't have to vote for them.
Thank you. The founders believed that direct democracy was more likely to ignore constitutional limits than representative democracy. Do you agree or disagree?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, that's a long question. I think you've discussed representative democracy, or representative democracy. What about direct democracy? Is that more likely to ignore constitutional limits, and why?
It is more likely to ignore the constitutional limits, because in a country like the United States, there's so many people that different people might want different things, and it might conflict with the Constitution and the set of rules the Constitution has already made.
Do you have any examples of that? Like, what's a faction? Do you know?
A faction by now, like it's debating, would be the Tea Party. It's a faction within the Republican Party, because that little faction wants the Constitution to be more conservative and go back to the way it used to be, but not necessarily the rest of the country would want it. So it's the direct democracy that's, in a way, stopping that little faction to take over the Senate and over the representatives.
Okay, another question?
How would you explain the rule of law, and why is it an essential feature of constitutional government?
The rule of law is the fact that the Constitution is the higher law, and it's important because without having the Constitution as the set of guidelines, many people will not interpret the Constitution in a way that they will, in a way, overthrow it.
Under the rule of law, is everyone subject to the rule of law?
Yes.
Even the president?
Yeah, the
Yes.
president has to follow. He can't commit a crime and not be punished for it. Everybody has to follow the law, and anybody could be an exception.
And that's why there's limits to it. So everybody has to follow it. Not anybody can get away. Everybody has to follow the rule, or else they're pretty much not following the Constitution. It even states it that it should, and even the president has to follow it.
An example is Nixon. When he went to the Supreme Court, it was impeachment, and they had to impeach him, and he thought he was above the judicial branch, above the Supreme Court, but he's not. Everybody is under the rule of law.
I have one final question, and it is, how would you explain the relationship of a constitution to laws passed by legislatures?
I think, are we at time, or we have 1 minute?
1 minute.
Okay. Please go ahead, I'm sorry.
Again, that was, how would you explain the relationship of a constitution to laws passed by legislatures?
Can you rephrase the question?
Okay, so what the question is asking you is how would you explain the relationship between the Constitution and laws passed by the legislature? So you have Congress passing laws, and how would that relate to the Constitution?
the laws passed by the legislators should follow the Constitution. So the Congress may be passing a law, but if it is not constitutional, it cannot pass. The President and the Congress may pass it, but the Supreme Court will say no.
Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause. You, Doug? We'll give you some comments.
I thought that your use of examples was very good. You threw in several examples to illustrate your concepts, such as the Nazis and Richard Nixon, and those were all a good way to demonstrate your reasoning. To improve, when you're giving your initial presentations, it's fine to read what you have prepared, but make sure that you do it very slowly, because when we're listening, if you speak really fast, it's hard for it to sink in.
I think you guys did a great job explaining with your use of examples like she has stated. Also, I think in order to improve, I think we can spread out the participation.
I don't have much to add. I thought you did a very good job. And again, just enunciate to us so that we can understand you a little bit better. Maybe you did a nice job with some supporting evidence. Lovely job. Oxford Dictionary, Woodrow Wilson, Federalist 33. Maybe a little more constitutional, find something in the Constitution that supports your argument when you go to that next level. Just look for that, and I think you did a really lovely job. I'm very impressed. Thank you. I think that's it. So very good. And I'm told that you drove down here by yourself. Your bus didn't make it. A lot of initiative there. Very good. Thank you. Please. All right.